Imagine stepping into a space built 5,000 years ago, a chamber of massive stones where the air itself seems to hold secrets. The moment you cross that threshold, something remarkable happens. The world outside falls away, and every sound you make takes on a new life. A whisper spoken softly near the wall travels with impossible clarity, while the wind and distant noises simply vanish. This is no accident of architecture. This is the sacred silence of megalithic structures, a phenomenon crafted with intention by ancient builders who understood something profound about the power of sound. These spaces were not just shelters or tombs, they were instruments. From the rolling green landscapes of Ireland to the sun-baked islands of Malta, our ancestors raised and carved stones into forms that defy simple explanation. They aligned passages with the stars, shaped interiors with mathematical precision, and in doing so, they left us with a mystery that echoes across millennia. What if these places were designed not just to be seen, but to be heard? What if sound itself was a kind of technology, a force used to shape human experience, to open doors of perception, and to connect the living with the divine? In this journey, we will explore how ancient cultures harnessed acoustics as a tool of transformation. We'll walk through the resonant chambers of Newgrange, descend into the haunting hypogeums of Malta, and listen for the whispers still trapped in stone. We'll see how architecture, ritual, and human consciousness intertwined in ways that challenge our modern assumptions about the past. This is more than a historical curiosity. It's a window into a forgotten relationship with the world, one where sound was not just vibration, but vision. Where silence was not empty but full of meaning. So come with us and let's decode the echoes of the past together. These ancient builders worked with a breathtaking scale and vision that still leaves us in awe today. Think of Stonehenge on the Salisbury Plain, its iconic sarsen stones hauled from miles away and arranged in a circle that precisely tracks the sun and moon. Or consider the immense passage tomb of Newgrange in Ireland, its white quartz facade glittering in the sunlight, hiding a long, narrow passage that leads to a cross-shaped chamber deep within an enormous earthen mound. Then there are the completely underground wonders like the Hypogeum of Hal Saflini on Malta, a labyrinthine complex carved entirely from the living rock, descending 3 stories into the earth. What's truly staggering is that these structures and thousands of others like them scattered across Europe, Asia, and the Americas were built millennia before the invention of the wheel, before written language, and without any metal tools. The sheer logistics of quarrying, transporting, and erecting these multi-ton stones is a monumental achievement that speaks to a highly organized and motivated society. But beyond the obvious engineering feat, there's a deeper layer of sophistication in their design. These weren't just randomly piled rocks. There's a clear and repeated architectural language. Many feature what's known as a corbelled roof, where stones are layered in gradually overlapping circles until they meet at the top, creating a stable, domed ceiling that has survived for over 5,000 years. The entrances are often long, narrow passages that force a person to enter in a single file, almost always oriented towards a significant celestial event like the winter solstice sunrise. And the materials themselves were carefully chosen. Limestone and granite are not just strong and durable, they are also incredibly resonant stones. They have acoustic properties that softer materials like sandstone simply don't possess. They can carry sound, vibrate with specific frequencies, and create echoes in a very particular way. This consistency is what's so fascinating. From the rolling hills of Scotland to the islands of the Mediterranean, builders who could have had no contact with one another were arriving at remarkably similar architectural solutions. They were all building chambers that were enclosed, often underground or within mounds, using hard, resonant stone and designing long, narrow entryways. This can't be a coincidence. It points to a shared understanding, a common purpose that transcended local cultures and geographies. Perhaps they were all tapping into the same fundamental human experiences of the sacred, or maybe there was a slow diffusion of ideas across vast distances. But the uniformity suggests that the form of the structure was intrinsically linked to its function. And when we see that so many of these shared features, the enclosed space, the hard walls, the long passageway, are also the very ingredients that create unique acoustic environments, it becomes a very compelling clue. It strongly hints that the experience of sound, of how the human voice or a simple instrument would behave inside these spaces, was not an afterthought. It was likely a central part of the blueprint, a universal language of vibration and resonance that these ancient cultures were harnessing for a purpose far beyond our modern understanding. To truly grasp the auditory magic of these ancient spaces, we need to step into the world of acoustics. Imagine dropping a single pebble into a perfectly still pond. The ripples spread out in perfect circles, hitting the edges and bouncing back, interacting with themselves to create a complex, shimmering pattern on the water's surface. Now imagine that pebble is a single note and the pond is a stone chamber. That's the essence of the acoustic phenomenon at work here. Sound is a pressure wave, and when these waves are generated inside an enclosed, hard-surfaced space, they don't just vanish. They bounce, they reflect, and they interact with each other in very specific, predictable ways based entirely on the room's geometry. The size and shape of these megalithic chambers are the first crucial ingredients. Many are roughly circular or oval, and their dimensions, often between 5 and 10 meters in length or diameter, are absolutely key. This size range is perfect for amplifying and sustaining the lower frequencies of the human voice. When a sound wave's wavelength matches the distance between two parallel walls, or fits perfectly within the diameter of a circular room, something extraordinary happens: resonance. The wave reinforces itself, building in strength and creating what's known as a standing wave. It's like pushing a child on a swing at just the right moment. Each push adds more energy, making the swing go higher and higher with the same amount of effort. In a stone chamber, a voice chanting or a drum beating at this resonant frequency would suddenly become louder, richer, and more powerful, seemingly charged by the space itself. This leads us to a particularly fascinating range, the frequencies between 90 and 120 Hz. This band sits right in the fundamental range of an adult male voice, the kind of deep, chesty tone you might use for a sustained chant or hum. Modern scientific studies, where researchers take sophisticated speakers and microphones into these sites, have consistently found that the chambers resonate most powerfully within this specific low-frequency band. But the effects go beyond what we can easily hear. Some of these frequencies dip into the realm of infrasound sound waves below the threshold of human hearing, around 20 Hz. You can't consciously hear infrasound, but you can absolutely feel it. It vibrates in your chest, it can cause a sense of unease or awe, and it's even been known to induce feelings of nausea or visual disturbances in laboratory settings. In a ritual context, this invisible, physical force would have been interpreted as a palpable, supernatural presence, the very touch of a spirit or god. Furthermore, these spaces don't just amplify, they also sculpt sound. The hard, non-porous surfaces of granite and limestone are highly reflective. They don't absorb sound like the soft furnishings in a modern home, they throw it back into the room. This creates a long reverberation time, meaning a sound hangs in the air for seconds after it's made, blending with new sounds to create a dense, immersive sonic tapestry. A single voice could sound like a chorus, and a simple rhythm could become a complex, overlapping pattern. At the same time, the chambers act as brilliant filters for external noise. The thick earthen mounds covering many tombs and the long, narrow entrance passages act as natural baffles, dramatically reducing sounds from the outside world like wind, rain, or animals. This creates that profound, sacred silence, a stark contrast that makes every internal sound seem that much more significant and intentional. When you combine all of these elements, the targeted amplification, the physical vibration of infrasound, the long reverberation, and the silencing of the outside world, you create an environment that is actively manipulating human perception. It's a recipe for altering consciousness. This isn't a happy accident of stacking some big rocks together. The consistent replication of these acoustic conditions across countless sites, using specific materials and precise dimensions, points to a sophisticated, empirical understanding. These builders were the first acoustic engineers, crafting spaces where sound wasn't just heard, but was transformed into a tangible, psychological force. For decades, the idea that ancient structures might have been designed for their sound was relegated to the fringes of archaeology, seen as speculation without hard evidence. That began to change in the 1980s with the determined work of a researcher named Dr. Paul Devereux. He co-founded what was called the Dragon Project, a long-term, multidisciplinary investigation into unusual phenomena at ancient sites across Britain. While the project looked at various anomalies, Devereux became fascinated by the persistent reports of strange acoustic effects at these locations. He moved beyond anecdote, bringing in audio engineers with frequency generators and sensitive recording equipment to actively test the sonic properties of stone circles and burial chambers. This was a pivotal shift from passive observation to active, scientific measurement. His team's work provided some of the first documented proof that these sites did indeed have unique and often powerful acoustic signatures, particularly a tendency to amplify and sustain low frequencies. While the tools were rudimentary by today's standards, the Dragon Project broke new ground, establishing acoustics as a legitimate, if still nascent, field of study. This early work paved the way for a new generation of scientists armed with far more sophisticated technology. Researchers like archaeoacoustician Stephen Waller have used modern audio software to analyze the soundscapes of megalithic sites. In one fascinating study, Waller explored the auditory illusions that might occur at a place like Stonehenge. He proposed that sound waves interacting with the stones could create interference patterns, areas where sound cancels itself out, potentially giving a person standing in that spot the eerie impression that the massive stones are absorbing sound. This isn't just about volume, it's about how sound behaves in a complex environment, creating perceptual effects that could have been interpreted as magical or divine. Perhaps the most comprehensive work in this field is being done by researchers like Dr. Miriam Kohler, who led a detailed acoustic study of the 3,500-year-old ceremonial center at Chavín de Huanta in the Peruvian Andes. Her work is a masterclass in modern archaeoacoustics. Her team used a technique called impulse response testing, where they record the brief, sharp sound of a balloon pop or a starter pistol within the ancient corridors and chambers. That single, impulsive sound contains a full range of frequencies, and by analyzing how the space reacts to it, they can create a complete acoustic fingerprint of the room. They then build incredibly precise three-dimensional computer models of the site, allowing them to simulate and experiment with sound in a virtual environment. This is how they discovered that the conch shell trumpets found at Chavin, known as pututus, produce a sound that resonates powerfully with the architecture's specific dimensions, creating disorienting and overwhelming auditory effects perfectly suited for the oracular rituals believed to have taken place there. The collective findings from these diverse studies are converging on a consistent and startling conclusion. Time and again, the resonant frequency of these chambers, the specific pitch at which the room itself sings back, falls between 90 and 120 Hz. This is not a random number. It sits squarely within the fundamental range of the adult male voice, the kind of low, sustained chant or hum that would be used in ritualistic ceremony. This acoustic coincidence is simply too precise and too widespread to be accidental. It strongly suggests that the architecture and the human voice were designed in concert with one another. The stones were tuned to our biology. These discoveries are fundamentally reshaping our understanding of these monuments' purpose. For over a century, the prevailing interpretation was functional and mundane. They were tombs for storing bones or barns for storing grain. But if your primary goal is storage, you don't go to the extraordinary effort of precisely shaping your chamber to amplify a specific musical note. The acoustic evidence powerfully supports the idea that these were spaces for sensory experience and ritual performance. They were designed to manipulate perception, to create an atmosphere where the boundary between the natural and the supernatural felt thin and permeable. This research opens a door, allowing us to hear these ancient spaces not as silent ruins, but as they were intended, thrumming with purposeful sound, alive with a power that our ancestors understood intimately. So let's focus on that specific number, 110 Hz. It appears again and again in the acoustic studies of these ancient chambers, from the depths of Maltese hypogeums to the heart of Irish passage tombs. This isn't a random frequency pulled from the air. For an adult male, 110 Hz is a very comfortable, fundamental pitch for a sustained chant or hum. It's the kind of sound that comes from deep within the chest, a resonant tone that can be held for a long time without straining the voice. The female voice, often with a fundamental frequency around 220 Hz, which is exactly the first harmonic or octave of 110 Hz, would also lock perfectly into this acoustic system. This creates a fascinating implication. These spaces weren't just designed for sound in a general sense. They were quite literally tuned to the human voice, creating a seamless feedback loop between person and architecture. When someone inside one of these chambers produces that specific tone, the room itself answers. The sound wave hits the hard stone walls and reflects back, but because the distance between the walls is mathematically aligned with the wavelength of that frequency, the returning wave reinforces the new one being created. This is the principle of resonance. The sound doesn't just get louder, it gains a palpable physical presence. It can create a sensation that the sound is no longer coming from your own voice, but is emanating from the very stones around you. In some sites, like Newgrange, this resonance manifests as a distinct buzzing or humming sensation, almost as if the air itself is vibrating. A whisper, which contains a broad spectrum of soft, high-frequency sounds, gets caught and amplified by this resonant environment, allowing it to travel with uncanny clarity across the chamber. Conversely, the chaotic, unpredictable noises from the outside world, the rustle of leaves, the call of a bird, the sound of the wind, are effectively muted, filtered out by the long, narrow entrance passage and the absorbing quality of the earthen mound covering the structure. This creates that profound and intentional contrast, a sacred silence that is then filled only with the powerful, amplified sounds of ritual. The precision required to achieve this effect is what truly stuns modern researchers. We are not looking at a happy accident. To tune a room, you must have a deep, even if intuitive, understanding of the relationship between a room's dimensions, the materials used, and the sounds they will produce. The builders likely discovered these principles through long observation and experimentation. Perhaps they noticed that certain caves or natural rock shelters had interesting sound qualities, and they sought to replicate and enhance those effects in their own constructions. They learned that a chamber of a specific size and shape, built with a specific type of stone, would respond powerfully to the human voice. This represents a form of practical, applied science that predates the Greek philosophers, who are often credited with the discovery of harmonic principles by thousands of years. This wasn't just technical skill for its own sake. The immense effort required to achieve this acoustic tuning, selecting the right stones, shaping them, arranging them with such geometric care, tells us that the auditory experience was a cultural priority of the highest order. The sound itself and the specific state it could induce was the entire point. The architecture was merely the instrument designed to produce it. This shifts our perspective from seeing these monuments as passive containers of activity to viewing them as active participants in the ritual. The chamber becomes a co-performer, an amplifier of human intention and a gateway to a different state of being. The human brain is an instrument finely tuned to its environment, and when you change the acoustic environment in such a profound way, you change the mind itself. Inside these stone chambers, the combination of sensory elements was a recipe for psychological transformation. The near-total darkness would have eliminated visual distraction, forcing the brain to focus on the remaining senses, primarily sound and touch. The confined space and restricted movement create a feeling of containment and safety, or perhaps vulnerability, depending on the context, further narrowing a person's focus inward. And then, layered over all of this, you have the sound, a deep, resonant frequency that doesn't just enter through the ears but vibrates through the bones of the skull and the chest cavity. This is bone conduction, and it bypasses the usual auditory pathways, sending signals directly to the brain that feel more like a physical sensation than a sound. This entire multisensory experience can dramatically alter brainwave patterns. The steady, rhythmic pulse of a drumbeat or a chant at the resonant frequency of the room can guide the brain from a normal, alert beta state down into the more relaxed meditative alpha state, and even further into the theta state, which is associated with deep meditation, vivid imagery, and the threshold of sleep. It's in this theta state that the door to the subconscious swings open, allowing for hallucinations, profound insights, and a feeling of connection to something far greater than oneself. We don't have to look far to find modern parallels for this phenomenon. Anthropologists studying shamanic traditions from Siberia to the Amazon have documented this precise use of sound for thousands of years. The steady, monotonous beat of a drum at around 4 to 7 beats per second is a near-universal technology for inducing trance. This rhythm is no accident. It mirrors the frequency of theta brainwaves, effectively entraining the shaman's brain to follow its pace. The goal is to achieve an ecstatic state, a journey out of the body to communicate with spirit helpers, divine ancestors, or animal guides for the benefit of the community. The shaman uses these tools to cross a bridge between the world of the living and the world of the spirits. In the megalithic chambers of prehistoric Europe, we see what is essentially the same technology, but instead of carrying a drum, the participants stepped inside the drum. The architecture itself became the instrument, and the entire community could share in the experience. The chamber didn't just symbolize a portal to another world. Through its acoustic manipulation of consciousness, it actively functioned as one. This provides a powerful explanation for why these sites are so frequently associated with the dead. If you believe that death is not an end but a transition to another state of being, then what you need is a reliable method to open a line of communication. The altered state of consciousness induced by the chamber's acoustics would have provided direct, experiential proof of that other reality. A participant wouldn't just be told about their ancestors. They might hear their voices in the echoes, feel their presence in the vibrations, or even see them in the mind's eye. This transforms ancestor worship from an abstract belief into a tangible, repeatable experience. The chamber becomes a reliable tool for the community, a place where the veil is thin and the living can receive guidance, wisdom, and reassurance from those who have passed on. This wasn't about escapism. It was a practical and profound method for navigating the mysteries of life and death, for healing trauma, and for reinforcing social bonds with a shared, awe-inspiring experience that validated their entire worldview. The stones held the memory, and the sound activated it, creating a feedback loop between the living, the dead, and the very earth they built upon. Now, picture the scene inside one of these resonant chambers. It's not a quiet, somber affair like a modern church service. It is a full-body experience, a collective journey into another state of being. The air is thick with the smell of earth and the faint smoke of burning herbs. The only light comes from a single, flickering flame, casting dancing shadows on the walls that seem to pulse in time with the sound. A leader begins a low, droning chant, his voice finding that perfect resonant frequency of the room, around 110 Hz. Instantly, the space answers. His single voice is amplified and enriched, seeming to come from everywhere at once, no longer his own but the voice of the chamber itself. Others join in, their voices layering, creating a complex tapestry of harmonic sound that vibrates through the stone floor and into the bones of the participants. This is not merely singing, it is a form of active architecture, using the human voice to activate the latent power built into the stones. This immersive sonic environment served multiple, profound purposes. Firstly, it was a powerful tool for unification. In a world without mass media, shared identity was forged through intense, collective experience. The act of chanting or drumming together in a space that literally vibrates in unison creates a powerful psychological phenomenon known as entrainment, where individual heart rates and brain waves begin to synchronize with the external rhythm and with each other. This fosters a deep, nonverbal sense of community and shared purpose, dissolving individual ego into the collective whole. For a few hours inside that chamber, there is no I. There is only we, connected by the very air they are vibrating together. This strengthened social bonds in a way that simple speech never could, creating a resilient community capable of undertaking the monumental tasks of megalithic construction. Secondly, this controlled acoustic environment was a potent mechanism for facilitating mystical experiences. As we discussed, the combination of darkness, restricted movement, and resonant sound can guide the brain into trance states. In this context, the leader's voice, seeming to emanate from the walls themselves, could easily be interpreted as the voice of an ancestor or a local deity. The oracle room in the Hal Saflini Hypogeum is a perfect example of this intentional design. A person speaking into one of the carved niches finds their voice transformed. Lower frequencies are amplified with an eerie, omnipresent quality, while the higher frequencies are dampened, creating a distorted, otherworldly tone that doesn't sound human. For a group gathered in the dark, this would have been incontrovertible proof of communication with the spirit world. The shaman or priest acting as an intermediary wasn't just claiming to speak to the gods. The architecture itself was providing the audio proof, validating their authority, and solidifying their role as the essential conduit between the community and the divine. Finally, these rituals served as a crucial technology for emotional release and psychological processing. Life in the Neolithic was harsh and unpredictable. The rhythmic, overwhelming nature of the sound within the chamber provided a safe container for the expression of collective grief, fear, hope, and joy. It was a space where emotions could be amplified and released through the body in the act of drumming, dancing, and singing, followed by periods of awed silence. This catharsis was likely essential for managing the stresses of survival, a form of prehistoric therapy that used the physics of sound to heal the mind and spirit. The ceremony, supercharged by the acoustics, wasn't a mere superstition. It was a sophisticated and effective tool for maintaining the psychological health and social cohesion of the entire community, turning the very act of sound into a sacred, transformative force. While the architecture itself was the grandest instrument, our ancestors also crafted smaller, portable tools specifically designed to harness and manipulate sound within these sacred spaces. Scattered around megalithic sites and often found in burial contexts, archaeologists have uncovered a fascinating array of objects that defy simple categorization as mere art or tools. These are the ancient instruments, the tangible proof of a culture that prioritized auditory experience. Among the most evocative finds are lithophones, essentially stone xylophones. These aren't casually chosen rocks, but carefully selected slabs of specific, resonant stones like limestone or basalt that produce a clear, ringing tone when struck with another rock or a mallet. In some French Neolithic sites, arrays of these sonorous stones have been found, suggesting they were played in sequence to create simple melodies or complex, rhythmic patterns that would have been dramatically amplified inside a chamber. Another powerful sound tool was the bull roarer, found in cultures across the globe from prehistoric times to the present day. This simple device consists of a flat, oblong piece of wood or stone attached to a long cord. When swung rapidly in a circle, it spins and vibrates, producing a deep, pulsating, low-frequency drone that can be modulated by changing the speed of the swing. The sound is eerie and unmistakable, a visceral, roaring hum that can carry for miles across open landscapes and would have been utterly overwhelming in an enclosed stone chamber. Its ability to produce sustained infrasound would have created those physical vibrations in the chest that feel supernatural, making it a perfect instrument for ritual theatrics and inducing trance states. Then there are the more enigmatic objects like the beautifully carved stone balls found in Neolithic tombs across Scotland, especially in the Orkney Islands. Made from materials like sandstone and granite, they are intricately decorated with spirals and knobs, but their purpose has long baffled archaeologists. While theories have ranged from weapons to status symbols, some researchers, through experimental archaeology, have proposed a sonic function. When struck together in pairs, these balls produce sharp, percussive clicks. When rolled around inside a hollowed-out stone or ceramic vessel, they create a maraca-like rattling sound. These sounds, while seemingly simple, take on a new life in an acoustic environment designed to amplify and reverberate them. The resulting effect would be a complex, shimmering texture of percussion, layering over the drone of chants or bull roarers to create a rich, immersive sonic tapestry. Ceramic whistles and ocarinas have also been discovered at various sites. These are not crude noisemakers but finely crafted instruments, often shaped like birds or other animals, capable of producing specific, piercing notes. The choice of animal shapes is likely symbolic. A bird whistle might have been intended to mimic a bird's call, perhaps to summon a spirit associated with that creature. The high, clear tone of such a whistle would cut through the lower frequencies of chanting and drumming, creating a striking auditory contrast that could signal a specific moment in a ceremony or represent the voice of a spirit intervening in the human ritual. The key to understanding these instruments lies not just in finding them, but in hearing them in their intended context. experimental archaeologists have taken replicas of these artifacts into the very chambers they were found near. The results are startling. A lithophone that sounds faint and tinny in an open field becomes a profound, gong-like presence in a stone tomb, its tone sustained for seconds, washing over the participants. The drone of a bull roarer doesn't just fill the space, it becomes a physical force. This process of recreation transforms these silent museum pieces back into the powerful technology they once were. They move from being curiosities to being essential components of a ritual toolkit, providing the missing audio track to the silent film of archaeology. They prove that the sound was not an accidental byproduct but a deliberately composed element, a sacred technology used to navigate the boundaries between the human and the spirit worlds, making the intangible tangibly felt in the very bones of the participants. This idea of sound as a creative, life-giving force is embedded in the very oldest stories humanity tells. Across the globe, creation myths so often begin not with an action but with a sound. In the ancient Vedic traditions of India, the universe is brought into being through the sacred syllable Am, a primal vibration that contains all of existence within it. In the biblical book of John, the world begins with the Word. For the Aboriginal peoples of Australia, the landscape itself was sung into existence during the Dreamtime, with ancestral beings literally chanting the rivers, mountains, and animals into life. These aren't just poetic metaphors, they point to a foundational, ancient understanding that vibration and frequency are the underlying fabric of reality. So when we step into a megalithic chamber and use our own voices to create sound, we are not just making noise, we are participating in that primordial act of creation. We are using the same fundamental force that shaped the world to shape our own reality, to call something into being, whether it's a connection, a vision, or a presence. Within this worldview, the acoustic phenomena of these stone chambers would have been interpreted as nothing less than divine communication. Imagine you are a participant in a ceremony 5,000 years ago. You have been chanting for some time and the room is humming with energy. Then the leader stops, and in the silence that follows you hear it, a faint echo that seems to linger just a second too long, or a low-frequency rumble that vibrates up through your feet. In our modern scientific mindset, we would identify that as a standing wave or a trick of acoustics. But to you, in that moment, in that mindset, it is a response. The echo isn't an echo, it's an answer. The vibration isn't physics, it's the voice of the earth spirit or the ancestor you were calling to. The chamber itself becomes an oracle, a living entity that speaks back. This transforms the entire experience from a one-way ritual into a dialogue. You speak to the stones and the stones speak to you. This belief gives the architecture its ultimate purpose and power. It's not just a building, it's a listening device, a telephone line to the other side. We can find echoes of this belief system, quite literally, preserved in the folklore and place names of later cultures who lived among these ancient stones. The Celts, for instance, who inhabited lands rich with Neolithic monuments, spoke of singing stones and magical hills that would answer when called to. Many of their myths involve heroes conversing with standing stones or receiving wisdom from the wind whistling through a rocky crevice. The very name of the Irish Neolithic complex of the Bend of the Boyne, or Brún na Boyne, is associated with the mythological god Dagda, whose magical harp could change the seasons and control the emotions of listeners, a powerful metaphor for the controlling power of sound. In Cornwall, England, there's a famous stone called the Men Antall, known as the Crick Stone, which local folklore said would shout out a prophecy or a warning if you listened closely at certain times. These stories feel like distant, fragmented memories, a cultural inheritance from a much older time when the relationship between people, stone, and sound was not a legend, but a lived, experiential truth. This symbolic layer is what elevates our understanding of these sites from sophisticated engineering to sacred architecture. The builders were not just technicians, they were theologians and philosophers working in stone and sound. They understood that to create a genuine spiritual experience, you needed more than just belief, you needed proof. The acoustic properties of the chamber provided that proof in the most direct way possible through the senses. The feeling of the vibration, the sound of the answering echo, the way a single voice could be transformed into something vast and superhuman, these were tangible, repeatable experiences that validated their entire cosmology. The design of the structures, therefore, was a physical manifestation of their mythology. The long entrance passage wasn't just a hallway, it was a birth canal leading from the world of the living into the womb of the Earth Mother. The resonant chamber wasn't just a room, it was the heart of the world where the heartbeat of creation could still be heard and felt. This profound symbolism, encoded in architecture and activated by sound, reveals a depth of thought and a yearning for connection that makes these silent stones speak volumes about the human spirit. While the underlying principles of resonance and intentional design connect these ancient cultures, the way they applied this acoustic knowledge was beautifully diverse, shaped by their unique environments, beliefs, and ritual needs. This global tapestry of sonic innovation reveals a fascinating story of local adaptation. Take Malta's Hypogeum of Hal Saflini, a site carved entirely underground. Its design is intensely intimate, focused on the power of the human voice. The famous oracle room features a small, curved niche set at just the right height for a person to speak into. The architecture here isn't about projecting sound to a large crowd. It's about transforming a single voice into something unearthly. When someone speaks into that niche, the sound doesn't just get louder, it gets distorted, its lower frequencies amplified and its higher tones softened, creating a disembodied, booming effect that seems to emanate from the walls themselves. This suggests a ritual practice centered on oracular prophecy, where a shaman or priest could channel the voice of an ancestor or deity from the underworld, their words made supernaturally powerful by the very rock they stood within. Now travel northwest to the windswept landscapes of Ireland, to a place like the Carrowmore megalithic complex. Here, the tombs are often simpler, their chambers smaller and more enclosed. The acoustic focus shifts from the nuanced modulation of voice to the raw, physical impact of rhythm. The compact, stone-lined chambers with their massive capstones act like giant resonating boxes. Experimental archaeology has shown that the steady beat of a skin drum or the clacking of stone on stone within these spaces creates a powerful, percussive experience. The sound is immediate and visceral, a throbbing pulse that vibrates through the floor and into the bones of the participants. This points toward rituals of invocation or communal ceremony, where rhythm was used to raise energy, unite the heartbeats of the group, and perhaps even accompany ecstatic dance, a stark contrast to the intimate, vocal channeling of the hypogeum. Then journey across the ocean to the high Andes of Peru, where the ancient builders faced a completely different challenge: vast, mountainous distances. Here we find the Cholpas, tall, cylindrical stone towers built by pre-Inca cultures. Their purpose was often funerary, but their acoustic application was brilliantly practical. The high-altitude air and the specific, dry stone construction of these towers create exceptional conditions for sound to travel. Whistles or sharp calls made from the entrance of a cholpa can be heard with remarkable clarity over distances of a kilometer or more. This wasn't necessarily about ritualistic alteration of consciousness inside a chamber. It was about using acoustics as a functional tool for communication across deep valleys. It connected communities, allowed for warnings to be passed quickly, and perhaps even formed a network of auditory signaling that tied the world of the living to the isolated resting places of the ancestors. The sound served as a literal bridge across the imposing landscape. This incredible diversity tells us something crucial. There was no single monolithic, megalithic religion or universal acoustic blueprint. Instead, we see a shared human discovery, the understanding that stone and sound can interact in powerful ways, being adapted to meet local spiritual and practical necessities. The Maltese, building in soft, easily carved limestone underground, refined the art of the vocal oracle. The Irish, working with abundant surface granite, developed chambers that amplified the primal power of rhythm. The Andean cultures, navigating a sprawling and vertical world, engineered their stone towers to project sound across impossible distances. Each culture looked at the same fundamental principles of physics and asked a different question of it, crafting a sonic environment that answered their own unique needs. This regional specialization doesn't weaken the argument for intentional acoustic design. It strengthens it immensely, showing a sophisticated and flexible application of knowledge that was deeply woven into the fabric of their daily and spiritual lives. Trying to hear the past is like trying to listen to a song played on a broken instrument that's been left out in the rain for 5,000 years. The first and most obvious challenge is the sheer age and degradation of these sites. Many of these chambers have partially collapsed. Stones have shifted, settled, or been removed. The earthen mounds that once encased them, which acted as brilliant acoustic baffles sealing in sound, have often eroded away, exposing the internal passages to the open air and completely changing how sound behaves within them. Even a few centimeters of stone displacement or a change in the wall's surface texture, maybe from millennia of water seepage or lichen growth, can dramatically alter the resonant frequencies of a room. So when a modern researcher measures a frequency of 95 Hz in a damaged chamber, the haunting question remains, is this the note the builders tuned it to, or is this just the note it groans at now in its old age? Beyond the physical decay, we face a profound informational void, the complete absence of written records or user manuals. The people who designed and used these acoustic spaces were pre-literate. They left no written explanations, no architectural plans, no sacred texts describing the chants they used or the specific sonic effects they were trying to achieve. We are, in a sense, trying to reverse engineer a sophisticated technology with no schematic, relying solely on the silent, weathered hardware itself. This forces researchers to become detectives, piecing together clues from a wide array of indirect sources. They turn to comparative ethnography, studying the sound-based rituals of contemporary or historical indigenous cultures who may have preserved similar traditions. They analyze rare artifacts that might be instruments, and they scour later folk myths and place names for any lingering echoes of acoustic reverence, like those stories of singing stones. Then there are the environmental variables we can scarcely account for. The soundscape inside one of these chambers 5,000 years ago would not have been the same as it is today. Was the floor covered in dry rushes or packed earth? Would animal skins have been hung on the walls, acting as sound-dampening panels? How did the different climate, perhaps colder, wetter, or windier, affect the air density and thus the speed of sound within the space? Even the vegetation outside has an impact. A chamber entrance surrounded by a dense forest would filter external noise very differently than one sitting on a bare, windswept plain. These are not trivial details. They are integral components of the original acoustic design that are almost impossible to recover, meaning our reconstructions are, at best, educated approximations of a lost sensory world. Given these immense hurdles, the methodologies researchers use are necessarily creative and interdisciplinary. Experimental archaeology is key. This isn't just about measuring what's there now, but about actively testing ideas. Scholars build physical-scale models of the chambers or create full-size replicas using original techniques and materials to hear how they behave. They use software initially designed for concert hall acoustics to create impulse responses and auralizations, effectively creating a virtual sound simulation of the ancient space. This process involves a fascinating blend of cold, hard data and intuitive interpretation. A scientist can run a frequency sweep and get a precise graph of the room's resonance, but it takes an anthropologist or a musician to interpret what that might have meant culturally, why that specific frequency was significant, and how it might have felt to experience it in a ritual context. This rigorous, ground-truthing approach is what separates modern archaeoacoustics from mere speculation. It forces a humility upon the field, a constant acknowledgement that we are dealing with probabilities and possibilities, not certainties. But rather than diminishing the findings, this methodological honesty makes the converging evidence all the more powerful. When multiple lines of inquiry, the physics of the stones, the ethnography of similar cultures, the replication of ancient instruments, all point toward the intentional use of sound, we can move beyond guesswork and start to hear the faint but unmistakable echoes of a purpose long hidden in plain sight. This technological revolution in acoustic archaeology begins with a tool that seems almost magical in its capability: LiDAR, or light detection and ranging. Mounted on aircraft or drones, these laser scanners fire millions of light pulses toward the ground, piercing dense forest canopies to map the slightest variations in the Earth's surface. For archaeologists, this has been a game-changer, revealing the full extent of ancient sites that were once hidden beneath vegetation or had been plowed nearly flat over centuries. But for the acoustic researcher, a highly detailed LiDAR map is so much more than a picture. It's the foundational blueprint for a digital resurrection. This precise topographical data provides the exact dimensions, angles, and contours of a site, which can then be imported into sophisticated 3D modeling software. This digital twin becomes the canvas upon which the sounds of the past can be painted. Once the virtual model is built, the next step is auralization, a term analogous to visualization, but for sound. This process uses complex algorithms based on the physics of sound wave propagation. The software calculates how sound waves would emanate from a source, such as a person chanting or a drum being struck, and then interact with every single surface in the digital environment. It factors in the material properties of those surfaces, the sound-absorbing quality of earth, the hard reflectivity of granite, the way a corbelled roof might diffuse and scatter certain frequencies. Researchers can then virtually place a sound source and a listener anywhere within the model and hear, through high-fidelity headphones, exactly what that experience would have been like. They can test different theories. What if the chant came from this corner of the chamber instead of the center? How would the sound change if the entrance was covered by an animal skin? This moves the field from speculative observation into the realm of testable, repeatable acoustic experimentation. A pioneering force in this endeavor is the Acoustics and Music of British Prehistory, or AMP, research group. This collaborative project brings together archaeologists, musicians, and computer scientists to recreate the soundscapes of Neolithic and Bronze Age Britain. Their work is a perfect example of this interdisciplinary approach. They don't just model the silence of a stone circle, they populate it with the sounds of likely instruments, from replica carnyx horns to deer hide drums. By running simulations, they can answer questions that have puzzled historians for decades. For instance, could a leader's voice have been heard clearly by everyone gathered within the vast space of a henge? Their models show that the arrangement of the stones themselves creates intricate patterns of sound shadows and amplification zones, suggesting that the architecture may have been designed to direct sound to specific ritual areas or to certain participants, effectively creating an ancient public address system. The impact of these tools extends far beyond the research lab, offering an unprecedented bridge to the past for the general public. Virtual reality experiences are now being developed that allow anyone to don a headset and stand inside a perfectly reconstructed Newgrange, not in sterile silence, but during a solstice ceremony filled with the imagined chants, drums, and reverberations that might have once filled the air. Museums are incorporating interactive acoustic displays where visitors can play a digital lithophone and hear its tone resonate through a virtual chamber. This democratization of the experience is profound. It transforms public understanding from an intellectual concept, "This place had good acoustics," into an emotional, visceral one. You don't just learn about the past. For a few moments, you feel a connection to it, hearing what someone might have heard 5,000 years ago and understanding on a gut level why these spaces felt so sacred and powerful. These innovations are fundamentally expanding what is possible in archaeological inquiry. They allow researchers to conduct experiments that would be physically impossible or ethically questionable at the actual fragile sites. They can digitally restore a collapsed roof to hear the difference it makes, or remove modern background noise to experience the true sacred silence. This technology is not about replacing traditional archaeology. It's about augmenting it, providing a powerful new set of ears to listen to the whispers of history. The digital soundscape becomes a time machine, offering the closest we may ever come to standing in the footsteps of our ancestors and participating in the rituals that defined their world. Descending into the Hypogeum of Hal Saflini is like stepping out of time, entering a 3-story labyrinth carved with stone tools directly into the island's soft Globigerina limestone over 5,000 years ago. This was not a place of the living in any conventional sense. It was a sanctuary for the dead and a theater for the sacred, a subterranean world where architecture and acoustics fused into a single, powerful instrument. Among its many chambers, one space stands out with such profound sonic character that it has earned the name the Oracle Room. Its properties are not subtle. When a deep male voice resonates at a specific frequency, around 110 Hz, something remarkable occurs. The sound doesn't just bounce off the walls, it seems to be absorbed and then projected by the stone itself, creating a pervasive, booming hum that vibrates through the floor and into the very bones of anyone standing within. This isn't an echo in the familiar sense. It is a transformation of sound into a tangible, physical force, a sensation that can be felt in the chest cavity as much as it is heard by the ears. The design of this chamber reveals an almost unbelievable sophistication. The curved walls and the unique niche carved into one of them act as a perfect resonator for these lower frequencies. A person speaking into this niche doesn't just have their voice amplified. Its character is fundamentally altered. The higher, identifying tones of the human voice are softened, while the lower, vibrational frequencies are empowered, creating a distorted, omnipresent tone that seems to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once. For a group of people gathered in the dim, flickering light of an oil lamp, this effect would have been utterly supernatural. The voice of a ritual leader or a designated oracle would cease to be human, becoming instead the disembodied voice of an ancestor or a deity speaking from the underworld itself. The architecture itself became the medium for the message, providing incontrovertible sensory proof of contact with the other side. This intentional design is further supported by the artifacts discovered within the Hypogeum. Among the thousands of interred individuals, archaeologists found delicate figurines, the most famous of which is the so-called Sleeping Lady, a clay statuette depicting a woman reclining on a couch. While often interpreted as a representation of eternal sleep or death, her pose is also strikingly similar to that of a person deep in a trance state. Other figurines found on site appear to be listening intently, their hands cupped behind their ears. These artifacts are not mere grave goods, they are powerful clues to the rituals that took place there. They suggest a culture that venerated altered states of consciousness, that depicted figures listening for messages from beyond, and that may have associated the female form with the receptivity required for oracle work. The sound was not an isolated phenomenon. It was integrated into a complete symbolic system of belief, death, and communication. The Hypogeum's incredible state of preservation, sealed for millennia and only rediscovered accidentally in the early 20th century, offers us a rare and pristine window into this ancient practice. Unlike above-ground stone circles that have been weathered and altered, the Hypogeum's underground environment protected its acoustic properties. This allows modern researchers to experience and measure effects that are likely very close to what the original users intended. The site is so fragile that access is now highly restricted, but for those scientists who have been able to conduct tests, the data is unequivocal. The resonance is intentional, the acoustic effects are repeatable, and the psychological impact is profound. The Hypogeum of Hal Saflini stands as perhaps the world's most compelling example of prehistoric psychoacoustic architecture, a monument not just to death, but to the enduring human desire to bridge the gap between the living and the dead using the most powerful tool at our disposal, the transformative power of sound. While Newgrange's winter solstice alignment rightfully captures the imagination, with that single shaft of sunlight piercing the inner chamber at dawn on the shortest day of the year, this breathtaking light show was only one part of a meticulously orchestrated sensory experience. The true magic of Newgrange unfolds in the darkness, in the way the space itself transforms sound into something palpable and otherworldly. The moment you step off the green Irish landscape and into the long, narrow passageway, you are entering an acoustic filter. The walls, constructed from massive, interlocking stones and covered by an immense earthen mound, immediately begin to mute the outside world. The sound of the wind, the calls of birds, the rustle of grass, all of it falls away, replaced by the sound of your own breath and footsteps. This is the first step in a process of sensory deprivation and amplification, designed to focus the mind inward and prepare it for what was to come. The passage itself, stretching over 19 meters into the heart of the mound, acts as a natural waveguide for sound. Any noise made within it is channeled efficiently toward the central chamber, its energy preserved rather than dissipated, but the real acoustic wonder awaits in the chamber itself. The architecture here is a masterpiece of corbelling, with large, flat stones layered in overlapping circles that rise to form a soaring, domed ceiling nearly 6 meters high. This shape is not just structurally sound, it is acoustically brilliant. The curved, hard surfaces prevent sound from being absorbed, instead reflecting it back into the room in a way that creates a long, lingering reverberation. A single spoken word doesn't just echo, it hangs in the air, blending with the next word to create a dense, resonant tapestry. A whisper uttered softly near the entrance can be heard with startling clarity by someone standing in the very back of the chamber, an effect that feels less like physics and more like magic. This environment would have been the perfect setting for rituals centered on rhythm and voice. Experimental work has shown that rhythmic percussion, like the steady beat of a hand drum, creates a powerful, throbbing pulse within the chamber. The sound waves reinforce each other, building in intensity and creating a physical vibration that can be felt through the stone floor. Chanting, particularly at the low frequencies that the room naturally amplifies, would have had a similar effect, unifying the voices of participants into a single, omnipresent drone that seemed to emanate from the stones themselves. This immersive sonic experience, combined with the total darkness and the confined space, is a proven recipe for altering human consciousness, guiding the brain into trance-like states conducive to spiritual vision. The profound interplay between the solstice light and this acoustic power is where the true genius of Newgrange is revealed. We can imagine a scenario where a select group gathered in the pitch-black chamber, perhaps over the cremated remains of their ancestors. As the dawn approached, the ritual would have begun with sound, with chanting, drumming, or the playing of instruments, the noise rising and filling the space, vibrating through the bodies of the participants. Then, at the precise moment of sunrise, a thin blade of light would have begun to crawl slowly down the passageway, cutting through the darkness and the sound-saturated air to illuminate the central chamber. The visual spectacle of the sun's rebirth would have been accompanied by this powerful auditory backdrop, each sense reinforcing the other in an overwhelming expression of the cycle of death and rebirth. This was not a passive observation but an active, participatory drama. The architecture facilitated a direct, experiential connection to the cosmos and the ancestors. The sound within the chamber was the voice of the community and the spirits, while the light was the tangible proof of the sun's return and the promise of renewal. Newgrange, therefore, stands as a monumental testament to a holistic world, where light, sound, architecture, and human ritual were all understood to be interconnected threads in the fabric of the sacred. It was a machine for making meaning, designed to generate awe and confirm fundamental beliefs about life, death, and the universe through the direct manipulation of human perception in the most powerful way possible. Stonehenge presents a fascinating counterpoint to the enclosed, intimate chambers we've explored. Standing on the open Salisbury Plain, it seems to defy the very principles of resonant spaces we've come to understand. Without walls or a ceiling to contain and reflect sound waves, how could it possibly participate in this ancient culture of sacred acoustics? The answer lies not in the architecture of a room, but in the very stones themselves. Many of the smaller bluestones that form part of the inner circle were hauled over 200 miles from the Preseli Hills in Wales, and they possess a remarkable geological secret. Unlike the massive, dense sarsen stones that form the outer trilithons, certain bluestones are rich in quartz crystals and have a fine-grained metallic structure. When struck with a smaller, harder stone, they don't just produce a dull thud. They ring. They chime with a clear, metallic, bell-like tone that can carry surprisingly far across the flat landscape. This discovery, championed by researchers like archaeomusicologist Rupert Till, opens up a completely different sonic dimension to megalithic sites. It suggests that Stonehenge might have functioned as a massive, permanent lithophone, a stone instrument built on a gargantuan scale. Imagine a ritual where participants, perhaps moving in a processional pattern, would strike specific bluestones with stone hammers. Each stone, due to its unique size, shape, and mineral composition, would have produced a slightly different pitch, creating a melody or a complex rhythmic pattern that was both heard and felt. This transforms our image of Stonehenge from a silent, static arrangement of stones into a dynamic, interactive instrument, its music woven into the ceremonies that took place within its circle. The sound wouldn't have been contained, it would have been broadcast, a public declaration of ritual that could be heard by a much larger gathering spread out across the plain. The open-air environment, while different, still operates on the same core principles of resonance and intentionality. The acoustics here are about projection and clarity over distance, rather than the immersive, overwhelming reverberation of a closed chamber. The arrangement of the massive sarsen stones, while not enclosing space, would have created complex sound shadows and reflective surfaces. A voice speaking from the center of the circle might be channeled and amplified in specific directions, while the sounds of ringing bluestones would bounce between the uprights, creating a shimmering, metallic soundscape. This shows us that the manipulation of sound wasn't a one-size-fits-all practice. These cultures were acoustic ecologists, tailoring their designs to the environment and the purpose. In a hidden hypogeum, the goal was to create an intimate, personal, and overwhelming sensory journey inward. At a place like Stonehenge, the goal may have been to create a shared, large-scale auditory experience that united a vast community under the open sky, connecting the ringing of the stones to the movements of the sun and moon above. This profound adaptability demonstrates a sophistication that moves far beyond superstition and into the realm of a deep and practical understanding of how sound shapes human experience. But to truly grasp the power of these spaces, we need to move beyond the physics of the stones and into the biology of the body. The experience wasn't just auditory, it was deeply, undeniably physical. When those low frequencies, particularly infrasound below the range of human hearing, filled a confined chamber, they didn't just enter through the ears. They vibrated through the floor, they resonated in the chest cavity, they rattled the bones of the skull. This is bone conduction, a direct pathway for vibration to bypass the eardrum and stimulate the inner ear and the body's sensory nerves directly. The result is a sensation that is felt more than it is heard, a deep, internal buzzing or humming that can be both unsettling and exhilarating. Your heart rate might synchronize with the rhythm, a phenomenon known as entrainment, slowing down or speeding up in response to the external pulse. Breathing can become deeper, and some people report a tingling sensation on the skin or a slight lightheadedness. These are not imagined effects. They are measurable physiological responses to specific acoustic environments. Modern laboratory studies have begun to quantify these ancient experiences. Research into infrasound has shown that exposure to these inaudible frequencies can trigger a range of subconscious reactions. In controlled settings, subjects report feelings of unease, coldness, or a sense of presence, the eerie feeling that they are not alone. Some experience heightened emotional states, ranging from intense awe and wonder to profound fear and anxiety. The vibration can even cause visual disturbances, like seeing fleeting shapes or flashes of light in peripheral vision, a result of the eyeballs themselves resonating at these low frequencies. For a group of people gathered in the dark, already psychologically primed for a spiritual encounter, these physical sensations would have been incontrovertible proof of a supernatural event. The chill down the spine wasn't just a metaphor, it was a physiological reaction to the soundscape, interpreted as the touch of a spirit or the breath of a god. The chamber wasn't just amplifying sound, it was amplifying belief, using the human body's own wiring as its medium. This biological dimension explains why these spaces were so effective and why they were considered so sacred. The altered state of consciousness achieved wasn't necessarily about hallucinogenic plants or complex theological concepts, though those may have played a part. It could be achieved through the direct physical manipulation of human physiology by the architecture itself. The combination of sensory deprivation, the darkness, the restricted movement, with this overwhelming sensory input of sound and vibration created a perfect storm for psychological transformation. It was a technology for transcendence, built from stone and tuned to the human body. This understanding moves us from seeing these sites as merely symbolic to recognizing them as functional tools, engineered to produce a specific, repeatable, and powerful experience that could facilitate healing, divination, or communion with the ancestors. The power was real because the people felt it in their bones and in their hearts, and that visceral, physical proof made the spiritual world as real to them as the stone they could touch. The profound sensory experiences within these stone chambers were far more than individual spiritual journeys. They were the very glue that held communities together. Think about the power of singing in a choir or the electric feeling of being in a crowd at a concert, everyone moving to the same beat. Now, amplify that feeling 100-fold within the resonant, sacred darkness of a place like Newgrange. This phenomenon has a scientific name: entrainment. It's the subconscious tendency for individual biological rhythms, heartbeats, breathing, even brainwaves to synchronize with a powerful, external, rhythmic stimulus. When a group of people chants together or drums in unison within an acoustically active space, their bodies literally begin to operate as one. Individual anxieties and differences melt away, replaced by a powerful, shared physiological state. This isn't just a metaphor for unity, it is the physiological creation of unity, a tangible merging of the self into the collective. For a megalithic society facing the constant challenges of survival, this shared, euphoric state was an incredibly powerful tool for reinforcing social bonds and forging a powerful, unbreakable group identity. This collective experience also served to reinforce the social structure and hierarchy that was essential for the community's functioning. The very design of these spaces often facilitated this. The acoustic sweet spots, the areas of greatest resonance and power, were likely reserved for the ritual leaders, the shamans, elders, or chieftains. Their voices, transformed and amplified by the architecture, would have been experienced not as human speech but as a divine mandate. The overwhelming sensory experience validated their authority, positioning them as the essential conduits to the spirit world. The community, united in their entrained state, would have been highly receptive to messages delivered in this context, making these chambers incredibly effective spaces for facilitating group decisions, resolving disputes, or announcing important information. A declaration made under such conditions, surrounded by the vibrating approval of the stones and the unified energy of the people, would carry a weight and legitimacy impossible to achieve in the cold light of day. The chamber became a political tool, a place where the social order was not just discussed but physically felt and emotionally reaffirmed. Beyond politics and cohesion, these gatherings served a critical function in managing the immense psychological stress of Neolithic life. The threat of famine, disease, and conflict was a constant shadow. The resonant chamber provided a sanctioned space for the controlled release of this collective anxiety. The act of rhythmic drumming, ecstatic dancing, and loud communal chanting is cathartic. It allows fear and tension to be expressed, amplified by the space, and then released out into the world. This was likely followed by periods of profound, shared silence, allowing for a collective calm and a sense of renewal to settle over the group. This cycle of intense sensory overload followed by peaceful unity acted as a form of ancient group therapy, a necessary pressure valve that maintained the psychological health of the entire community. It transformed abstract fears into a shared, manageable experience, reinforcing the idea that no one faced these challenges alone. The structure, therefore, was not just a temple or a tomb. It was a vital public utility for emotional and social well-being, its acoustic properties engineered to heal and strengthen the very fabric of the community itself. In a world without written records, how did vast libraries of knowledge survive for centuries? The answer lies not on parchment, but in the human voice and the powerful mnemonic architecture of sound. For non-literate societies, information was a living, breathing entity, preserved through complex oral traditions where rhythm, melody, and rhyme were the essential tools of memory. Epic poems, genealogies, laws, and creation myths were not merely recited. They were performed, set to specific rhythmic patterns and musical cadences that made them incredibly durable. This sonic encoding transformed dry facts into compelling narratives that could be accurately passed from one generation to the next. The steady meter of a chant acts like a cognitive scaffold, providing a predictable structure that helps the speaker recall the next line, while the musicality engages emotional centers of the brain, forging stronger neural pathways that make the information far more resistant to forgetting. Now, imagine placing this sophisticated oral technology inside a perfectly tuned resonant chamber. The effect would have been transformative. An elder reciting the lineage of chieftains or the laws of the tribe wouldn't just be speaking into empty air. They would be performing with the chamber itself as their amplifier and collaborator. Their voice, enriched and empowered by the stone, would take on a gravitas and authority that a normal speaking tone could never achieve. The long reverberation time would cause phrases to hang in the air, layering over each other and creating a dense, hypnotic texture that further immersed the listeners in the narrative. This wasn't just a lecture, it was a multisensory immersion. The listeners weren't just hearing the history, they were feeling it vibrate through their bodies, making the experience profoundly memorable. The architecture essentially became a co-teacher, using physics to brand the information into the minds of the apprentices, ensuring that the sacred stories and vital practical knowledge of the community would not be lost. We can find echoes of this practice preserved in the folklore of later cultures. Celtic myths are rich with references to places where the land itself speaks or remembers. There are numerous tales of singing stones and hills that would recite poetry or reveal truths to those who knew how to listen. The Welsh myth of the boy who gains wisdom by listening to the whispering reeds is another powerful metaphor for this idea of receiving knowledge from the environment itself. These stories feel like distant cultural memories, a lingering folk recognition that certain places, perhaps the very megalithic chambers they lived among, once served as resonant vessels for the community's knowledge. The site itself becomes a character in the story, a guardian of tradition. This perspective shifts our view of these monuments from purely spiritual spaces to multifunctional centers of learning. They were the original universities where the curriculum was sung into the walls, and the diploma was the ability to hold the resonant frequency of your ancestors' voices in your own. The sacred sound had an intensely practical application. It was the most advanced information storage technology of its age, ensuring that the wisdom of the past would continue to echo into the future. So what happened to this profound sonic tradition? Why did the resonant chambers fall silent, their acoustic secrets seemingly forgotten for millennia? The decline wasn't caused by a single cataclysm, but by a slow, powerful tide of social and spiritual transformation that washed over the ancient world. As human societies evolved from dispersed tribal communities into more centralized, urbanized civilizations, the very foundations of life began to shift. The focus moved from the cyclical rhythms of nature and the ancestral past toward the organized administration of the present, the building of cities, the codification of laws, and the expansion of trade networks. In this new world, power was increasingly concentrated in the hands of kings and priests who ruled from palaces and temples. not from the old, earthy mounds that belonged to a different era. The massive communal effort required to maintain these sites, both physically and ritually, became less of a priority when a society's energy was being channeled into constructing walls, roads, and granaries. The stones, once the vibrant heart of the community, began their long transition into silent monuments of a bygone age. This societal shift was accompanied by a profound revolution in religious thought. The old ways were intimately tied to the spirits of place, the genius loci of a specific spring, forest, or stone. The resonant chamber was a direct interface with this animistic world, a place where the veil was thin and you could literally feel the presence of the other side. But with the rise of large-scale, organized religions, particularly the monotheistic faiths that spread across Europe and the Mediterranean, the divine became increasingly transcendent, a singular, all-powerful God who resided in heaven, far above the earthly realm. Worship moved out of the dark, chthonic womb of the earth and into the open, ordered space of the temple or church. The new liturgy was based on the spoken word, on scripture and sermon delivered from an altar by a designated priest. The participatory, immersive, and ecstatic experience of the megalithic ritual, where sound was a physical force that everyone could feel and help create, was often replaced by a more passive, observational form of devotion. The unpredictable voice of the stone oracle was supplanted by the authoritative, written word of God. We must also consider the sheer practical challenge of preservation. These sites, while monumental, were not impervious to time. An earthen mound requires constant upkeep to prevent erosion and tree roots from cracking its structure. A corbelled roof, a masterpiece of engineering, is still vulnerable to a single shifting stone that can compromise the entire chamber. As knowledge of the original building techniques faded, the ability to effectively repair these structures would have diminished. Furthermore, changes in climate or local environment could have rendered some areas less habitable, leading to population migration away from the sacred sites. A chamber that was once the center of a thriving community might find itself isolated in a depopulated landscape, its rituals no longer sustainable. In some cases, the sites were deliberately co-opted or destroyed by incoming cultures seeking to establish their own dominance and erase the spiritual power of the previous inhabitants. The stones were toppled, the passages were filled, and the knowledge of their sonic purpose was buried along with them. Yet, to say this culture completely vanished would be a mistake. Its echoes did not fade so much as they were transmuted, absorbed into the folklore and local traditions of the people who continued to live among these ancient stones. The old practices may have been officially abandoned, but the memory of their power persisted in stories told around hearthfires for generations. The Celtic myths of talking stones and singing hills are a clear example, a lingering cultural recognition that these places were once alive with a voice. In many parts of Europe, folk traditions well into the Christian era involved rituals at old stones, leaving offerings, crawling through holes for healing, or listening at certain times of the year for prophecies. These actions, though their original meaning may have been forgotten, feel like ghostly reflexes of the older sonic rituals. The power of the place remained in the collective imagination, even if the technical understanding of why had been lost. This persistent folk memory is a testament to the deep and lasting impact these acoustic experiences had on the human psyche, an impact so profound it could not be entirely erased by changing gods or new ways of life. It simply went underground, waiting for a future generation to come and listen once more. For centuries, the silent stones of ancient sites whispered their secrets to visitors who felt their power but couldn't quite articulate why. The formal study of these acoustic properties, however, lay dormant, often dismissed as fringe speculation until a perfect storm of technological advancement and shifting academic perspectives converged in the late 20th century. The real turning point came as recording equipment became more portable and sophisticated, allowing researchers to move beyond anecdotal accounts and into the realm of hard data. This wasn't just about noticing an echo, it was about measuring impulse responses, mapping frequency modulations, and creating precise digital models. The field needed a new kind of scholar, one comfortable at the intersection of cutting-edge science and ancient history. This gave rise to a wave of interdisciplinary collaboration that fundamentally reshaped the inquiry. Archaeologists began partnering with acoustic engineers who brought the precise language of physics and mathematics. Anthropologists and ethnomusicologists joined the conversation, providing crucial cultural context for how sound is used in ritual and tradition. Suddenly, a site wasn't just a collection of stones, it was a complex auditory environment waiting to be decoded. This collaborative spirit broke down the traditional silos of academia, creating a vibrant new field now known as archaeoacoustics. This newfound legitimacy is perhaps best evidenced by its acceptance into the most established halls of scientific discourse. Major international conferences, such as the International Congress on Acoustics and the meetings of the European Acoustics Association, now regularly host dedicated sessions on architectural and archaeological acoustics. Here, laser scan data is debated alongside interpretations of ancient myth, and audio software simulations are presented next to findings from archaeological digs. This institutional recognition is vital. It validates the field, attracts funding for larger projects, and encourages a new generation of students to pursue this hybrid path of study. The conversation has moved from the fringes to the forefront, challenging long-held interpretations of well-known sites. A passage tomb is no longer just a tomb. A stone circle is no longer just a calendar. They are being re-evaluated as performance spaces, ritual instruments, and essential tools for community cohesion, with their acoustic properties standing as a central, rather than incidental, feature of their design. Perhaps one of the most exciting outcomes of this modern rediscovery is the creative dialogue it has sparked beyond the world of academia. Artists, musicians, and composers have been profoundly inspired by the acoustic findings from these ancient spaces. Sound installations now use multi-channel speakers to recreate the resonant frequencies of Newgrange for museum audiences. Composers are writing new music specifically for performance within these chambers, their compositions responding directly to the unique reverberation times and standing waves of the architecture. This artistic engagement is not merely illustrative, it is a form of research in its own right. A musician's intuitive understanding of how sound behaves in a space can sometimes reveal nuances that a graph of data might miss. This creative resurgence transforms public engagement, allowing people to experience the power of these sites emotionally and sensorially, not just intellectually. It closes the loop, bringing the ancient purpose of these spaces' sensory immersion and experiential wonder back to life in a powerful, modern context. This fusion of science and art ensures the legacy of these sonic temples is not locked away in academic journals but is instead heard, felt, and continually reimagined. Despite the incredible progress made in understanding these ancient soundscapes, we are still standing at the threshold, listening to the first few notes of a symphony whose full composition remains just out of reach. The most tantalizing mysteries are not just about the physics of the spaces, but about the human experiences that unfolded within them. We can measure the resonant frequency of a chamber, but we can only imagine the specific chants, songs, or prayers that were used to activate it. Were there sacred melodies passed down orally and now lost forever that were perfectly composed to harmonize with the stone? Did different frequencies correspond to different intentions? A lower drone for communing with ancestors, a higher, sharper tone for healing rituals, or a rapid rhythm for ecstatic dance? We may never recover the actual soundtracks of these ceremonies, but future research is bringing us closer to understanding their structure and impact. The next frontier lies in hyper-realistic simulation. Imagine a virtual reality experience so advanced that it doesn't just show you a model of Newgrange, but allows you to inhabit a physically accurate acoustic avatar within it. Future research will leverage ever more powerful computing to create oralizations that account for variables we can only guess at today. The presence of animal skins on the walls, the body heat and density of a crowd of participants, even the specific flora that surrounded the site and filtered external noise. These simulations will be dynamic, allowing researchers to test thousands of scenarios in a virtual lab. What if the chamber was only half full? How would the sound change if the entrance was sealed with a leather hide? This isn't just about recreating the past. It's about conducting controlled experiments that are impossible to run on the fragile originals, systematically isolating each variable to understand its contribution to the overall experience. Beyond the virtual world, broader comparative studies will be crucial. The field of archaeoacoustics has, understandably, focused heavily on the most famous and well-preserved sites in Europe. But a global perspective is needed. Detailed acoustic studies of ancient structures in the Americas, Africa, and Asia could reveal whether the use of sound was a universal human discovery or a technology that emerged independently in isolated pockets. Do the pyramids of Mesoamerica or the rock-cut temples of India share similar acoustic properties? By building a massive, cross-cultural database of acoustic signatures, researchers could identify patterns and anomalies that tell a richer story about human innovation and spiritual expression. This comparative approach would move us from studying individual sites to understanding a potential worldwide phenomenon of sonic architecture. Perhaps the most futuristic and intriguing direction involves looking inward, not at the stones, but at ourselves. Could there be a biological component to this story? Geneticists are now able to extract and analyze ancient DNA from human remains found at these sites. One fascinating line of inquiry is whether certain populations might have had genetic predispositions that made them more sensitive to specific acoustic phenomena. For instance, some people today have a heightened sensitivity to infrasound or are more easily induced into trance states through rhythmic stimulation. Could the communities that built and used these chambers have possessed a higher prevalence of such traits, making them uniquely attuned to the technology they were creating? This isn't about suggesting a deterministic genetic link, but rather exploring a potential biocultural feedback loop where the architecture and the human nervous system co-evolved, each shaping the other over generations. The ultimate goal of all this technological and methodological innovation is to achieve a form of empathetic archaeology, to move beyond knowing what people did and begin to understand what they felt. The potential is to one day not just analyze a site, but to experience a whisper of the awe, the unity, and the profound connection that was the entire purpose of these magnificent structures. Each unanswered question is an invitation to listen more closely, to collaborate more widely, and to approach these ancient wonders not as puzzles to be solved, but as conversations to be joined across the vast expanse of time. This profound drive to shape sound and space speaks to something fundamental within us, a core aspect of human nature that transcends time and technology. It reveals that our ancestors were not merely surviving, they were seeking, with a sophisticated and creative yearning, to engineer moments of awe and connection. This shatters the outdated image of prehistoric people as simple brutes concerned only with food and shelter. Instead, we see master architects of experience, intuitive physicists, and spiritual philosophers working in stone. Their greatest achievement wasn't the moving of a multi-ton slab, but the understanding that by moving that slab into a specific position, they could move the human soul. This reframes our entire history, showing that the pursuit of beauty, meaning, and transcendental experience is not a luxury of modern civilization but a primary, ancient, and essential human impulse. This ancient fusion of art and science also challenges our modern, often compartmentalized, view of the world. We tend to separate the practical from the spiritual, the scientific from the artistic, but in these megalithic structures, such distinctions melt away. The precise geometry required to achieve a specific resonant frequency is a stunning feat of engineering, yet its purpose was entirely spiritual and emotional. The architecture was both a calculator and a cathedral, a scientific instrument and a work of art. This holistic approach suggests that for most of human history, understanding the world was a unified endeavor. To know the mathematics of a sound wave was to know the voice of the divine. To feel a vibration in your chest was to receive a scientific datum about the nature of reality. This invites us to reconsider our own relationship with technology and creativity today. In an age of hyper-specialization, the megalithic builders remind us that the most profound innovations often occur at the intersections where data meets wonder and where calculation serves compassion. Furthermore, this deep time perspective on acoustics highlights a timeless human quest for meaning-making. We have always used the tools at our disposal to answer the great questions of existence, to touch the intangible, and to find our place in the cosmos. 5,000 years ago, the most advanced technology for this purpose was shaped stone and the human voice. Today, it might be a virtual reality headset or a digital streaming service. The mediums change with dizzying speed, but the underlying intention remains remarkably constant. We crave shared experiences that make us feel part of something larger than ourselves. The resonant chamber was an early virtual reality, a technology designed to simulate an encounter with the ultimate. Recognizing this continuity can humble our view of modern progress. It suggests we are not so different from those who gathered in the dark. We are simply using different instruments to play the same eternal song of belonging. Ultimately, the silent stones ask us to listen not just to the past but to our own potential. They stand as a testament to what humans can achieve through careful observation, patient experimentation, and collective vision. They prove that innovation is not solely about efficiency or convenience, but about deepening the human experience. In their enduring silence, they speak volumes about creativity, collaboration, and our unending desire to weave the physical and metaphysical worlds into a coherent, meaningful whole. This legacy is not locked in the past. It is a living invitation to consider how we might use our own knowledge and tools to create spaces both physical and cultural that resonate with beauty, foster connection, and honor the profound, ancient need for wonder that still echoes within us all. If you feel the call to experience these ancient soundscapes for yourself, you absolutely can. Many of these incredible sites are open to the public and waiting for you to step inside and listen. A journey to Ireland's Boyne Valley puts you within easy reach of Newgrange, where guided tours take you down the long passageway and into the resonant heart of the chamber. While the winter solstice lottery is highly competitive, visiting at any time of year still allows you to experience the awe-inspiring architecture and remarkable acoustics firsthand. In Malta, visiting the Hypogeum of Hal Saflini is a more regulated experience due to its fragility. with a limited number of daily tickets available that often need to be booked well in advance. This careful management ensures the preservation of the site's delicate microclimate and extraordinary sonic properties. Across the UK, countless stone circles and burial chambers like Misho in Orkney or Wales and Smithy in England are freely accessible or available through heritage organisations, offering a more solitary and contemplative encounter with the past. For those who cannot make the journey across the globe, technology now offers a powerful alternative. Museums and research institutions are creating incredibly detailed virtual reality experiences that allow you to don a headset and be transported into a digitally recreated ancient site. Through high-quality headphones, you can hear accurate oralizations of what a chant or drumbeat would have sounded like within the chamber, all from the comfort of your home. Online platforms and university research projects often host interactive simulations where you can adjust variables like sound source and frequency to hear the acoustic response for yourself. These digital tools are not just convenient, they are also democratizing access, allowing students, researchers, and the simply curious from all over the world to participate in this rediscovery without contributing to the physical wear and tear on the monuments themselves. Whether your visit is physical or virtual, approaching these spaces with reverence is paramount. These are not merely tourist attractions, they are fragile archaeological treasures and for many still hold deep spiritual significance. If you are visiting in person, always follow the guidelines set by heritage stewards. Stay on marked paths, never touch the stones as the oils from your skin can accelerate erosion, and maintain a quiet, respectful demeanor so that others can have their own moment of connection. The privilege of entering a space that has survived for millennia comes with the responsibility to ensure it survives for millennia more. Your mindful presence helps protect the very properties you've come to experience. That act of personal engagement, of hearing a whisper defy physics or feeling a silent vibration in your chest, transforms academic curiosity into a deeply felt understanding. It bridges the gap between past and present, making the ingenuity of our ancestors not just a concept to be studied, but a profound reality to be felt. But this extraordinary sonic heritage, a fragile inheritance passed down over 50 centuries, now faces an array of modern threats that could silence these ancient instruments forever. The greatest danger is often invisible to the naked eye. The precise resonant frequency of a chamber is a product of its exact dimensions and the integrity of its stonework. When moisture from increased rainfall seeps into the mortarless joints of a corbelled roof, it can freeze and expand in winter, shifting a stone by mere millimeters. This tiny movement, negligible in a standard building, is enough to detune an entire chamber, flattening its vibrant resonance into a dull echo. Similarly, ground subsidence caused by drought or nearby construction can cause a monolithic wall to settle unevenly, warping the sonic landscape within. These changes, driven by a changing climate, don't just damage the structure, they erase the very acoustic signature it was built to create, permanently altering our experience we are only just beginning to understand. The very human desire to witness these wonders also poses a significant risk. Mass tourism, while vital for funding and awareness, brings a constant stream of vibrations, changes in humidity from breath and body heat, and the gradual, corrosive effect of skin oils on ancient stone surfaces. The delicate acoustic properties of a space like the Hal Saflini Hypogeum, preserved for millennia in a stable, sealed environment, are now vulnerable to the daily comings and goings of visitors. Each footstep, each spoken word, however hushed, contributes to a cumulative impact that can subtly degrade the very phenomena people come to experience. The challenge here is not to lock these sites away entirely, but to manage access with extreme care, implementing strict limits on visitor numbers, mandating silent observation, and using advanced environmental monitoring systems to ensure that conditions inside remain within a safe range that preserves both the physical structure and its intangible acoustic qualities. Thankfully, conservationists are now armed with a suite of non-invasive technologies that allow them to protect these sites without causing further harm. Laser scanning creates millimeter-perfect digital models that can be used to detect the slightest structural shifts over time. Sensitive vibration sensors placed around a site can monitor for damaging tremors from nearby traffic or construction. Hygrometers and thermal cameras track minute changes in humidity and temperature that could precede mold growth or stone erosion. This data-driven approach allows for preventative conservation, addressing problems before they cause irreversible damage. Furthermore, by creating highly accurate acoustic models from these digital scans, researchers can effectively preserve the sonic properties of a site in a database, ensuring that even if the worst should happen, the precise acoustic fingerprint of the chamber is not lost to future generations. International cooperation has become a cornerstone of these preservation efforts. A designation as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, like those granted to Newgrange and the Hal Saflini Hypogeum, is far more than an honorary title. It provides a crucial framework for shared expertise, technical assistance, and access to international funding streams specifically earmarked for conservation. It also elevates the site's profile on the global stage, applying diplomatic pressure to protect it from immediate threats like encroaching development or unsustainable resource extraction. This global recognition reinforces the idea that these monuments are not the sole property of one nation, but are part of the shared cultural heritage of all humanity, and their preservation is a responsibility we all share. The race to protect these sites is a race against time, driven by the urgent understanding that we are only just beginning to listen to what they have to say. Every stone stabilized, every visitor managed sustainably, and every acoustic measurement taken is an act of saving a unique chapter in the human story. It is the preservation of a technology that speaks to a different way of being in the world, one where the boundaries between the physical and the spiritual were navigated through the universal language of vibration. To lose these sonic landscapes would be to lose not just ancient ruins, but a key to understanding the depth of human creativity and our timeless yearning to connect with forces greater than ourselves, a loss that would truly leave our history silent. The sacred silence of stone chambers is not an absence of sound but a carefully crafted auditory environment that ancient builders used to harness force, meaning, and connection. This was not a passive discovery but an active, intentional technology born from millennia of observation and experimentation. These master builders were the first acoustic engineers, understanding that the size of a room, the type of stone, and the shape of a passageway could transform the human voice into something transcendent. They were tuning the very earth itself to the frequency of the human spirit, creating instruments of stone that could play the music of consciousness itself. This reveals a sophistication that forces us to completely rewrite our understanding of prehistory, moving from a narrative of survival to one of profound spiritual and scientific inquiry. From inducing altered states to unifying communities, sound was a powerful tool in megalithic culture, reflecting a deep and intuitive understanding of physics and human psychology. The throbbing rhythm of a drum in a resonant chamber didn't just create a beat, it synchronized heartbeats, aligning a group of individuals into a single, cohesive unit through the biological magic of entrainment. A low chant at 110 Hz was not merely a note, it was a key that unlocked altered states of awareness, facilitating journeys into the subconscious without any external substances. This was a holistic science where architecture, biology, and belief were woven into a seamless whole. The chamber was a psychological tool, a therapeutic space for processing collective grief and fear, and a political arena where social order was reinforced through overwhelming sensory experience. It was all these things at once, a multifunctional marvel that served the complete human being, body, mind, and spirit. As we continue to uncover these secrets, we gain not only insight into the past but also a powerful mirror for our own modern world. In an age of digital saturation and constant noise, the ancient pursuit of sacred silence feels more relevant than ever. Their technology was not about escapism but about connection to each other, to their ancestors, and to the natural world. It challenges us to consider how we might design our own environments to foster deeper human connection and moments of authentic awe. What does our modern architecture say about our priorities? Could we, too, create spaces that prioritize sensory richness and collective experience over mere efficiency? The legacy of the megaliths invites us to listen more deeply to our environment, to each other, and to the timeless human need for meaning that still resonates within us all. Thank you for joining this exploration into the echoes of the past. If this journey through time and sound resonated with you, we would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What was the most surprising revelation for you? If you'd like to join us for more adventures into the world's greatest historical mysteries, please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next